right? I think we are live. Beautiful. So let's go ahead and make some moves. Let's see here. Once again, just for people on YouTube, um, we went over the oil yesterday. So you don't even, if there's anybody new, you don't even know what I'm saying. So let me bring up the slide so everybody can kind of figure out what this presentation is about. Give me a second. Share. Well, first off, turn your video on, Aaron. All right, video on. I gotta remember to do that when I first get on. I keep forgetting. All right, now we'll share our slide presentation. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, man. There we go. And now let's get into the presentation. So first off, today we're going to talk about the money value chain. Now, I guess I got to explain the difference between a supply chain and a value chain. A supply chain is something that's being built, something that's being manufactured. So there's a lot of pieces to it, right? A lot of parts, a lot of pieces. And then you take all the components, you put it together, and you come out with the final product. That's a supply chain. All right. Now, there's value in the supply chain, but the main part is to supply some kind of a product, some kind of a tangible item. Well, the crazy thing is that money has a supply chain because if you look at the paper, somebody had to manufacture the currency paper, with all of the little holograms and process it because it's not actually paper. It's some kind of fabric that they use for our money. But somebody had to process the fabric and put the paper and then the ink that's needed, the special ink that they use, all the technology that goes into it. So there is a supply chain to create the paper money. But the majority of money is actually digital. That doesn't need that supply chain. So we call the money chain a value chain. And I guess let me look up the definition. I can show you the difference. But there's a reason why I call it a money supply chain and not a value chain. All right, a supply chain is a system that moves a product or service from a supplier to a customer, while a value chain is a process of adding value to a product or service throughout a life cycle. You see the purpose of why I call it a money value chain? Because it's adding value to the product or service throughout its life cycle. So as they're printing the money or they're creating the ones and zeros, you have to add some kind of value to it for people to want to use it. For there to be a usury, for there to be a utility, there has to be value that people say, well, yeah, I can exchange this for something. So that is the number one purpose of the money. How do the government, how does the economy, how does the institutions add value to where we see the value enough to want to use it? And if you want to know a difference, all you got to do is compare the dollar and crypto. Crypto doesn't have that cycle. They don't have that board. They don't have those leaders in that industry making sure crypto is continuously adding value. You see the difference? That's supposed to be currency, but there is no powers that be that's constantly monitoring crypto to make sure that there's value. Unlike the dollar, unlike other currencies, you can go into gold. There is no leaders, there is no board of directors, board of governors making sure gold is valuable enough that people want to exchange it for something. But that does exist with the dollar, with the financial system, the global financial system. The central bank system is what allows the dollar to continuously have value. And if that board of directors was not there, we would see the dollar and the whole fiat currency system crash because it's fiat. There is nothing backing it. So they constantly have to monitor it to give it value, to make sure we see the value. It's a psychological game, but that's the reason why I call it a value chain, because somebody is monitoring it to make sure that it has value, adding value. And sometimes they have to decrease the value. That's something that I learned when I was in sales many years ago. There's something called the takeaway. And basically this psychological strategy is that you offer something to the customer and then tell them that they can't have it. And that's basically what the Fed is doing. When they're raising interest rates and lowering interest rates, they're doing the takeaway. You can't have it, which makes people want it more. And I know this may not make sense. Let me break it down a little bit more. If the Fed takes a 3 months and they raise interest rates, maybe 6 months they raise interest rates, that's the takeaway. It's too expensive for you. Only the rich folks can use credit cards. It's not for you lowly people. So that way, when they lower interest rates back down, everybody is rushing to go get their credit cards. I can use it now. It's the great takeaway. Inflation goes up. You're getting less for your money. So when inflation comes back down, you're rushing to go buy things. It's the great takeaway. It's a psychological game because fiat currency doesn't have any value. The only value is in our use of it. So they constantly have to reassure us and show us where the value is. And we're going to go over where that value lies today. Details, step by step. All right. I want to let everybody on TikTok know that we're no longer on TikTok. That's why you can't see the screen. We're now on YouTube. If you click the link in my bio, you can find the YouTube link. I don't know why this image is not. Give me a second. Give me a second, guys. I got to fix TikTok. This image is not loading, right? What are you doing, dude? I can't fix it. Yeah, I can't fix the image on TikTok. But guys, if you're on TikTok, you can't see in any of the slides. You're not going to get the full gist of the presentation. So if you want to see the full presentation, if you want to learn how to trade like a professional, if you want to learn economics, if you want to learn custom, exclusive ways of analyzing, we don't do charts. We show you how to trade and analyze like the professionals do. You will never see me talk about options, Forex, crypto, or technical analysis. That is for the amateurs. And if you use those things, that you're already set up to lose your money. So if you want to learn how to trade like a professional, we are on YouTube right now. Click the link in my bio, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and you'll be able to learn an exclusive way of trading that you cannot find anywhere else. I'm only going to be on TikTok for maybe another 10 minutes, and I'm gonna get off. So you might as well go over to YouTube right now if you are interested in learning more. All right, so with that said, guys, now let me show you the dollar value chain. How are they adding value to make people want to use a fiat currency? We're going to show that to you right now. So this is kind of what we went over yesterday, where the prime correlation is the relationship between the dollar and the oil. These are the two strongest global commodities on the planet. There is nothing that happens in an industry, in a banking system, in a currency. Nothing happens in a supply chain. There is not one thing that happens that the dollar and oil is not the first domino, the first two dominoes. And since we know that that is the power of the dollar and oil, we can trace anything that happens in the stock market back to the dollar, back to oil. The oil is the first domino, the dollar is the second domino, and then everything else falls after. And it's called a domino effect. Why are we using that analogy of the domino effect? because I teach my students a way to guarantee their trades. I teach you what the professionals do. They don't get into the markets and wonder what's going to happen. They already know months and years in advance. And if you learn the prime correlation, you'll have that same predictive power. Because we know that the oil is the first domino, the dollar is the second domino, and then everything else falls. So I teach you something called causal sequence. Causal sequence is this: you have 10 dominoes, right? In a supply chain, you got 10 dominoes. In an industry, you have 10 dominoes. In an economy, you have 10 dominoes. Every single economic report, 10 dominoes. And I'm just giving that number just as a placeholder. But you have a certain amount of dominoes in that sequence, in that process. What I'm trying to teach you with causal sequence, you don't have to know all 10. All you got to do is know the first 4 and the last one. You don't have to know the dominoes in the middle because they're going to fall no matter what. All you got to do is find the first 3 or 4 dominoes as you're looking at the news and doing your own analysis, looking at reports and analytics and statistics, financials. And then if you can line up the first 3 or 4 dominoes to confirm that the rest of that it is an actual setup, it is an actual process, it is causal sequence. All you have to do is know the last couple of dominoes. And sometimes these domino effects can be hundreds of pieces. You don't have to know any of the things in the middle. All you have to do is confirm the first 3, 4, or 5 dominoes to confirm that it is an actual opportunity, and then know the last couple of dominoes at the end of the sequence. And you can predict anything. You can guarantee anything in the stock market. This is what the professionals do. They have something called Bloomberg Terminal. And while you guys are looking at charts, they're looking at the data. They're looking at the supply chain. They're looking at the dominoes. They're looking at the domino sequence. They're looking at the causal sequence. You cannot learn this anywhere else. Nobody is even attempting to teach this. Everybody else, look at the charts. Look for that crossover. Look for that Fibonacci retracement. This is what the amateurs are doing, not realizing that the institutions are controlling every aspect of that chart. They decide when the market goes up. They decide when the markets go down. They decide the crossovers. They decide the strong levels. They decide the volume. They control every aspect of that chart. That's why we don't use it. We're not going to be controlled and manipulated by the institutions. We're going to unplug from the charts and look at the same data that they do. We're going to analyze the same data that they do. And now we're not a part of the herd. We're a part of the hunt. I want every single one of my students to be a part of the hunt, not a part of the herd. If you want to continue to lose your money, then just keep using charts. And you're going to scratch your head like, why did my technical analysis not work? Because they set traps. They already know what you're going to do. They're the ones that set the levels. So they already know they're setting you up to do what they want you to do. And they have a trap waiting for you. Now, sometimes they let you win. They let you have a taste. Here's $5,000. But they know that if you stay in the house, just like any casino, if you stay in the building, you will eventually give the money back to the house. So they don't mind you making money, because all they got to do is do some more manipulation, do some more traps, and they'll get the money back. They basically loaning it out to you. Here, hold this for a minute. I'll be back for this later. But my students don't have to worry about any of that, because we are a part of the hunt, not a part of the herd. And that all starts with learning the prime correlation, the relationship between the oil and the dollar. Now, I did mention that the dollar is the oil is first and the dollar is second. Let me explain this. The oil is first, and I explained this yesterday, because oil is split 60-40. 60% of oil is transportation, petrol, different types of fuel. The other 40% is textiles and different types of raw materials. And we went over the oil supply chain and showed you all of that nothing is wasted. 100 years ago, there was gook left over. There was smog in the atmosphere. That doesn't exist anymore. They don't let anything escape. Everything that comes out of that refinement process is an ingredient that they can sell. The natural gases they can sell, the all of the fuels they can sell, all of the tar, the plastics, every single thing can be processed into an ingredient or a product that they can sell. Your clothes, your drugs, your every component in that car, almost every single thing. We showed it to you yesterday. Did a complete breakdown of 6,000 ingredients, 6,000 products that come out of the oil refinement process. So I say that to say this, that if the oil has the fuel, then you need the fuel to transport all of the products in the supply chain, either within the supply chain or even after it's done and you have to ship it to the retailer, you have to ship it to the warehouse, you have to export it to another country, you have to ship it to the storefront, you have to ship it to the consumer. You cannot have a supply chain without the fuel. And then on the other side, the other 40%, you need all the ingredients to make the products. This is why oil is always going to be first. Because if there's an overproduction of oil or an underproduction of oil, it's going to affect the fuel and it's going to affect all of those ingredients that are used for all those products. So you can read an article about any consumer product. You can read an article about any type of fuel, any industry that has transportation, airplanes, boats, trains, cars, trucks. You know they use some kind of fuel. So you can take that industry, take that technology, take that product, and trace it back to anything in that oil supply chain, that oil refinement. And you now know the supply and demand months and years before. This is what the professionals do. Never look at a chart. So let me also explain this. You have the charts. I'm going to give you 3 levels. Well, I'm going to give you 4 levels. We're going to go to the end and then trace it back. Here are the 4 levels of analysis. At the very end, you have sentiment analysis. You want to know how the market participants, the investors and traders, you want to know what they're feeling. You want to know what they're thinking. That's called sentiment analysis. Now, before the sentiment analysis, you have technical analysis, the charts, the price moving up and down. Right? Because you find the sentiment out from the charts. That's why we put sentiment after. Because the charts is not enough. You got to be able to decipher the charts to get the sentiment. So sentiment is the last thing. Before that, you have the charts. Now, before the charts, you have the technical analysis. You have fundamental analysis, which is the financials, the reports, the revenue, the expenses. So you have the financials, right? All these financial reports that come out, the quarterly earnings, all of that. And then before the financials, I have something that I have called the prime analysis, where you're going to go into the supply chain and find the supply and demand real time. If there's not enough oil, if the interest rates are too high, maybe a metal is in low supply, maybe some mineral is in low supply, maybe there's an oversaturation, maybe there's an attack on a boat, maybe there's a conflict that's stopping the supply from getting through. You can find any news article and trace it back to prime analysis. And that prime analysis, if you're plugged directly into the supply chain, you know well in advance before the financial reports are ever compiled. Because if they are running low on supply, if they're running low on materials, We already know they won't be able to sell enough, and that's going to affect the financials. Let me say it for you again. We never look at financials because we look at the data before the financials ever hit the desk. We can look at the supply chain and know if there's going to be an oversupply or undersupply, if there's going to be more sold or less sold. We already know what the revenue is going to be on the financial reports. And then now the financial reports are going to dictate what they're going to do on the charts. And then the charts give us the sentiment. We don't need the sentiment. We don't need the charts. We don't need the financials. We're plugged directly into the source information, the supply chain. That's what gives us that predictive power. So we are ahead of everybody else. 99% of everybody in the stock market is looking at financials, charting, and sentiment. And they're missing it. Because we know it was going to happen weeks, months, and years in advance. You tell me something that's more powerful than that. Hopefully somebody on TikTok and YouTube want to learn this. They want to stop losing their money. They want to stop being lost. They want to stop being confused. They want to stop following other people. That is the reason why yesterday and today we're showing you the power of the oil, the power of the dollar. So let's show you the power of the dollar. We're going to literally show you what the dollar is. Nobody ever explains why is the dollar valuable? It's a fiat currency. Let's show you. So if you look into any kind of financials or banking, now keep in mind, our banking is global, right? Ever since 1944, we got a global financial system. In 1944, all of the central banks met. There were 44. That's so interesting that in 1944, there were 44 central banks all over the world. So the United Nations got all of those countries together. They met at Bretton Woods, Pennsylvania, and they all came up with a global financial system, a global central bank system. That is the first thing that they did to make fiat currency valuable. They connected all of the banks around the world. Remember I said I'm going to show you how are we using a currency that doesn't have any value? The value is in the usury. The value is in the utility. And they made it utility by connecting every central bank around the world in 1944 at Bretton Woods. It was called the Bretton Woods Agreement. And through that structure of what they created, they do something called double entry accounting. So what happens is you have two sides of the ledger, increase and decrease. You have debts and credits. And basically how the double entry works is if you're going to put something on in one area, you got to adjust the other area. If you have, and here's how it works. If you have $100 in the bank, now keep in mind right now it kind of auto calculates, but back in the day, people had to write out. I know this sounds archaic, but people had to write out when they went to the bank and took money out, they would go and manually write what they took out and how much they had left. Double entry. Because if you have $100 and you take out 50, you got to put 50 in what you have, and then you got to minus 50 in what you took out. Increase and decrease. Double entry accounting. I'm going to make this make sense at the end, but I want to introduce this because you cannot just have one side. You got to have both. It'll make sense by the end. So here is what we talk about double entry, both sides. At the very beginning of this 1944, when they set this up, and this goes back actually to 1914 when we got our central bank system. The Federal Reserve System was created in 1914. The law was passed in 1913. And I want you to see the correlation between the two. And this is what I mean about the people on TikTok. You can't see the slide. Look at the slide and you can see a correlation of what happened in 1913. There were two laws that were passed the same year. And I'm telling you that these two laws are one and the same. because the people that put this together, they met on an island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island. And the leader of that group, I won't say the leader, the person that was put as the chairman of that group, he eventually became the first director of the IRS. The same person that created the central bank system, the chairman of that group that put the whole thing together, he ended up being the first director of the IRS. These two pieces are one and the same. They're a part of the same system. So here is how our money has value. Taxation. Now, there are several, not even several, there are dozens of ways that the US taxes its citizens, not just its citizens, even imports, exports. There are so many ways that the US taxes, and that is how our money has value. Now, in the US, they get about $5 trillion worth of taxation just on our yearly taxes. That's only one of dozens. And I might even say hundreds of ways that they tax us. $1 is probably taxed. I would say 40 cents on every dollar is being taxed. 40 cents on every dollar. So basically, they're giving you $1, knowing that you're going to give them back 40 cents. Let me say this again. For every dollar that the US creates, for every dollar that the bank gives you, for every dollar, like loans, for every dollar that your employer gives you, the institutions know that 40 cents of every dollar is going to come back to them through taxation. But let's start it off from the very beginning. Every year we file our taxes, and the US makes about $5 trillion off of our yearly taxes. Now, the central bank has a deficit where they owe people around the world through bonds and different loans. They have a $33 trillion deficit, or that's what they tell you. So if you take the $5 trillion worth of taxation and apply it to the $33 trillion of deficit, they still have about $28 trillion that are left over. How are they going to pay off that $28 trillion? And please do not believe that we are literally that far in debt. No, we're not. They don't tell you this part. They want you to believe that we're $33 trillion in debt. Why? Because they want you to pay your taxes. They need you to pay your taxes so that the machine keeps running. But I promise you, we are not 28 or $33 trillion in debt. They have other means. They have other means of making the money, which I'm going to show you. So let's break it down. There are 360 million entities. That means all of the physical people and the companies. The physical people have social security numbers, and all of the corporations have EIN numbers. It's not a coincidence that the EIN number has the same amount of numbers as a social security number. That is what identifies an entity in the US, either an EIN number or either a social security number or an EIN number. 360 entities, people and corporations. And every single entity is being taxed, either yearly or throughout the process as money is exchanging hands. Every single time money changes hands, it's being taxed. Let me say that part again. The system is set up that every single time money changes hands, it is being taxed. When the bank gives the money, it's being taxed. When your employer gives you the money, it's being taxed. When you go to the grocery store or any retailer, you're being taxed. Even when you give money to somebody you know, it's being taxed. If somebody dies and they leave money, it's being taxed. Hundreds of ways that they're taxing our money. 40 cents on every dollar is going back to the institutions and the government. So here is the part that we don't know. Here's the part that they don't tell us. We don't know foreign trade tax. They never tell us. So although we're getting this $5 trillion of taxation with all the 360 entities, we don't know how much they're taxing the foreign products coming in or the foreign governments coming in. That is the unknown factor. And I believe that foreign trade taxation is making up for the deficit. And here's how I explain it. It just takes common sense. It just takes common sense. Here's how I explain it. If you, let's say you were a millionaire, multi-millionaire, and you wanted to hire somebody to manage your money, you're going to go out and get the best of the best. You're going to go out to an accountant, a bookkeeper, an investment advisor, whatever it is. And you're going to hire them to make sure that your money is safe, protected, invested, whatever. If that advisor, if that accountant does not manage your money correctly, if they don't advise you correctly, what are you going to do? You're going to fire them and then get somebody better. So why does the US government have the best advisors on the planet? They have financial CEOs on their cabinet. And let me tell you this secret. Let me tell you this secret. Every single cabinet over the last 150 years has had a Rothschild on the books. Let me say it for you again. Every single administration, every single presidential administration has had a Rothschild as a financial advisor. When we had the 1971 Nixon had to change everything, took us off the gold standard, there was a Rothschild at that military base when they came up with that program. There has been a Rothschild on the books every presidential term. So if you have these CEOs of all of these banks and investment firms advising you, do you really think that they're going to advise you to let your deficit get higher and higher and higher? No, they're going to come out with a nice strategy where you don't have to worry about it. And I'm breaking it down to you right now. They've done the numbers and they know that we have the taxation coming in from the citizens and from the corporations inside the country. And then now we got more taxation coming in from outside the country. And they probably giving a nice little buffer. As long as we're like $5 trillion deficit, we're good. And I think that's probably where it is. I think the rest, this whole 33 trillion, I would think about 30, like 3/4 of that is paid off. But they're not going to tell you that. And here's the thing. They don't have the numeric number to tell you. What does that mean? Because the majority of the foreign trade that's being paid back is not being paid back in money. What do I mean by that? Because when they give military gear to Israel, when they give military supplies to Ukraine, those countries are not paying us back in money. They're paying us back in commodities. Ukraine does wheat. Israel does diamonds. They're not going to pay us back in real money. They're going to pay us back in some other commodity. which sometimes cannot be accurately monetized. But I promise you, all of the stuff and the equipment and the stimulus and the foreign aid that we're giving to all of these other countries, it's not free. The US wants something back in return. But sometimes they can't monetize it or put a numeric value on it. But I promise you that we are not $33 trillion in debt. It's probably somewhere closer to about maybe 5 or 6 trillion, because we don't know how much we're making off of the foreign trade and the foreign reimbursement. But here's the takeaway. The takeaway is taxation. That's what's paying for the deficit. So let's go through all the different categories of taxation. These are just the categories, guys. Inside of these categories are all the different hundreds of ways that we're being taxed. All right, consumption tax, sin tax, travel tax, capital gains tax, inheritance, estate tax, income tax. We're going to get back to the value added tax. You got payroll tax, property tax, and then the tariffs, international tax. All of the different taxes are federal, state, local, and international. Now, let's get back to the value added tax, just to show you how you're being taxed multiple times. Value added tax is taxation inside the supply chain, right? So the bank is giving you a credit line, and through that credit line, you're now going out and buying materials. You're going out and getting labor. You're getting everything, transportation, vehicles. You're buying property. You're buying everything, and every single thing that you're buying is being taxed. And then on the other side of it are the people that own the vehicles, own the property. Maybe they're going to a labor company. Every single, all the raw materials, all of the components, every single thing in that supply chain that you're bringing in for your infrastructure, the company's paying taxes to get it, and the other side of the companies that have it are also being taxed to give it to you. That's value added tax. And if you understand the exponential of supply chains that are connected, there's a supply chain on raw materials like metals, and then those metals are then turned into they're turned into motherboards, or even like transistors, and then the transistors are turned into motherboards, and the motherboards are turned into computers. You see what I'm saying? So every single level of the supply chain is being taxed. This is how we know that it's not $33 trillion in deficit. Now, how are they able to tell us that? Because the payments aren't realized when they're telling you the deficit. Think about it. Let's say you go to a board meeting, right? You're on a board of a directors at a corporation. You're only going to talk about what's pertinent for that 30 days, for that quarter. You're not going to talk about what happened previously, and you're not going to talk about what's going to happen in the future. You're only talking about pertinent matters for that month or for that quarter. So we're not going to give you a report previously. We're not going to give you a report for the future. So whatever it is at that time, even though they know they have income coming in to pay the deficit, we don't have it yet. So we can still tell you 33 trillion. But I promise you, they already know the payments coming on those bonds. They already know the debt swaps. They already know the taxation. They already know the tariffs. They already know the money that's coming in. But they'll get on and tell you, or when they release the reports, they'll tell you, or they'll release the reports before the money comes in to pay for it. They don't want you to know the real deficit, and it is nowhere near $33 trillion. And I'm gonna make this make sense when we get to the actual value chain. I'm gonna make all this make sense. But everything is based on these categories of taxation. And inside of each one of these categories is dozens, which I proved to you when we went over the value added tax. Dozens of different ways we're being taxed. People, and corporations. So now on the other side of that is debt. That's what the deficit is, right? Debt. But I'm gonna show you how debts work into this. How does credit and debts work into the fiat currency program? So you got minting, you got loans, mortgages, credit cards, stimulus, foreign aid, government bonds, corporate bonds, repos. These are all the different forms of debt that's created. And through this debt or this credit coming from central banks, corporate banks, private banks, public banks, the credit is the flow. You ever heard of cash flow? They're masking it's not cash flow because cash is not real money, it's fiat. So they tell you on the front end that it's cash flow, but all it really is debt being swapped. Let me say it for you again. All cash flow is debt being swapped. Because even your dollars, if you look on the dollar bill, what does it say? This is a note that can pay a debt. So even the money that you're using is a debt note. So let me say it one more time. Cash flow means exchanging debt. All right, guys, I appreciate everybody's attention on TikTok. We're about to get off. I want to encourage you to use YouTube. We're not going to be on TikTok after the ban. I'm doing the transition now. Joe, I would love for you, you're a regular, I would love for you to go to YouTube. That's where we are now. We're not on TikTok anymore. You can't see the presentation. You're not going to get the full presentation because I'm about to get off right now. So I want to encourage you guys, if you want to learn this stuff, you got to go to YouTube. All right? I'll see everybody a little bit later. Thank you so much. So let me say it one more time before we move on. Cash flow just means that they're swapping debt. Even the paper money you're using is debt. It's a debt note. So now let's show you, let's put all the pieces together to show you how the credit, how the taxation, let's show you how all of that works in the money value chain to give the money value. So I'm going to blow this up so everybody can see it. And I don't mind moving it around. So we're going to start here and then I'll scroll up and let you see the rest. But I want everybody to see this value chain. All right? So we're going to start with number one. Now let me check the comments, make sure there's no questions as of right now. Give me a second. All right, no questions on Zoom. Let me check TikTok. All right, no questions on TikTok. All right. Sorry, no questions on YouTube. All right, so let's continue. If you guys do have any questions, either put it in the chat or unmute yourself and let me know. Or you can wait to after the presentation's over. All right. So let's start with number one. Number one is the Federal Reserve. This is the beginning of it. And even talking globally, because remember back in 1944, we started with 44 central banks. Today, we have over 216. We started with 44 central banks in 1944, and here we are close to 80 years later, and we have 4 times that. Actually, no, we have eight times that. 216 central banks and growing. So with all of those central banks, all those 200 plus central banks, every single one of them depends on the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve will do something first, and then every other central bank, all 200 plus, will react to the Fed. So we start with the Fed. If the Fed is number one. So what does the Fed do? The Fed is going to approve. They're going to make a decision on either raising or lowering interest rates, or they're going to approve printing or destroying money. That's minting. They're going to approve whether we're going to print more money or make more ones and zeros. They're going to approve the raising and lowering of interest rates and the raising and lowering of the money supply. It's called quantitative easing, which is raising. Quantitative tightening is lowering. Now, when they do make that decision about raising and lowering interest rates or printing and destroying money, they have to create, like let's say that they decide to print more money. When they decide to print more money, remember on the face of that money, it says it's a debt note. So you have to create the debt. If you're going to create the debt note, there has to be an underlying debt. And that underlying debt is a bond. So for every dollar they create, they got to create a corresponding bond. If they create $1 million of money or stimulus or government assistance, they have to also create $1 million bond or $1 million worth of bonds. I'm going to say it one more time because I want to drive this home so everybody gets it. That dollar, when you look at the face right there in the little corner, it says this is a debt note. Well, if it's a debt note, there should be a debt attached to it. And the debt that is attached to every single dollar is a government bond that was created. So let's go through it again. You have number one going to the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department is the ones that create the bonds. Now, let's go back to number two. Number two is the US government. They will also make decisions on giving the local stimulus to our economy. Maybe they're giving it to a bank bailout, a corporate bailout. Maybe they're giving a stimulus like they did for the pandemic. Any kind of stimulus that they're giving inside of the economy, or they're giving foreign aid. Either one of those, they have to create the money. And even if they're giving military supplies, you need the money to make the military supplies. So either way, if there's some kind of foreign aid, there's going to be the Treasury Department creating that money. And once again, if they're creating the money, they got to create the bonds. So the Treasury Department is creating money either from the Federal Reserve or from some kind of foreign aid or stimulus from the government. Monetary policy, economic policy. Either one of those is going to create a corresponding bond for the money that's created. Now we go to number three. Number three is when they create the bonds, right? After the bonds are created, here's where it gets interesting. Number four, they're going to contact all of the central banks, and they have certain banks called clearinghouses. Bank of America, all of the major banks, Bank of America, Chase. You guys know there are probably like 4 or 5 of these major banks. Trying to think of another one. Let me look it up. I don't want to misquote.
Wells Fargo and Citibank.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, Wells Fargo and Citibank are all of the major, what they call clearinghouses. And what that means is that the public banks cannot make a move until they go through the clearinghouse is the middleman between the central banks and the regular public banks. They're the ones that regulate everything. They're the ones that approve the amount of credit that can be infused into the monetary system. They're the gatekeepers. And since they're in that position of power, they have to show up for those auctions. If they don't show up for the auctions, their charter gets rejected. They have no choice but to show up for those auctions. It is mandatory. Because if they don't show up, the system is broken. Thank you, Jay. But all these clearinghouses are going to show up for that auction. There are also 12 central banks throughout the US. They're also showing up for the auction. And then those are the ones that will give it to the local public banks in the regions that these central banks and clearinghouses are regulating. And that's how the bonds and the credit gets disseminated into the system. Because those bonds will sit in their vault as they now create more loans and more credit. So now the auction bond is over. Now the banks are swapping those debts. They're swapping the bonds. The local banks, the number one, the most lucrative loan that a bank can give is real estate. So the bonds and the real estate, they zip the real estate up in what's called REITs. It's a batch of real estate. And then that's the main thing that they are now swapping and exchanging. Bonds and REITs. And that exchange first happens between the banks and all of the central banks and the federal. That's what 5 and 6 is. 5 and 6 is this cycle of all of the local public banks, the clearinghouses, and the central banks all swapping bonds and REITs. And I'm going to explain how that works in a minute. So 5 and 6 is this nice little cycle of swapping bonds and REITs. So now let me show you how this really works. How do they know what to swap? It's all debt. How do they know what to swap? What is their purpose? What is their outcome that they're looking for when they're swapping debt? 2 things. So I give the analogy of Lucky Luciano and Scarface, Al Capone. They're loan sharks. And that's really what banks are. So as they're loan sharking, Lucky Luciano is going to loan out $5,000, but he's going to ask for $500 every single month. I'm going to give you $5,000, but I want you to pay me $500 a month in repayment. Al Capone is going to give a loan to somebody for $10,000. But he's going to say, you got to pay me $300 a month. So let me show you both sides. You got Al Capone with a $10,000 loan at $300 a month. And you got Lucky Luciano with a $5,000 loan with $500 a month. So the principal, Lucky Luciano's principal is less, but the monthly payment is more. That is the decision that everybody makes when they're swapping debt. Do I want the principal to be larger, or do I want the monthly payment to be larger? And depending on their double accounting, remember the original double accounting, they're going to choose basically whether they want larger principal. They want to stack their books to make it look like they have more money. So they're going to go out and do their debt swaps to get a larger amount of principal to make it look like they got millions of dollars in the bank, even though they got smaller monthly payments coming in. Because if they can show their investors or any of those people the amount of money that they've made, they're going to look really good to their shareholders. And then now they're going to go back to business as usual and then swap the debt out where they're going to get all those monthly payments coming in. And both sides don't mind swapping because they're looking for a different outcome. The other person may have bills to pay. They got other people to pay. They got to keep the lights on. They got employees to pay. So they want more money coming in. So they don't mind sacrificing the total principal to get a larger monthly payment coming in. And I got a perfect way to explain this. But somebody may say, well, that doesn't make sense. Here's the reason why they do it. Because if you look at a home, a 30-year mortgage, almost 99.9% of people never go to term. Most people never pay their house off in 30 years because what do? They either sell it, they refi it, and get the equity out. Nobody ever goes to term. That's the same way with the bonds and the loans. As long as they got the monthly payment coming in, who cares about the principal? And now I can apply it to the deficit. They have the same thinking on the deficit. As long as we got these bonds, as long as we got these loans, as long as we got the taxes coming in, as long as we got those monthly payments coming in, we are good. We're not trying to pay off the whole thing, because if we let the deficit get too low, then people might stop paying. There's a level of fear that we can use to get people to pay the taxation, to get to pay their loans. So we got to keep the deficit high as incentive, as fear mongering. And the same thing with the government shutdowns. It's just fear to get you to pay your taxes, to pay your loans. So let me recap one more time. Our financial system is based on credits, bonds, and loans, and the monthly payments on those bonds and loans. And as long as those monthly cash flow is coming in, what did I say cash flow was? Cash flow is just the swapping of debt. So we have people constantly using debt notes to pay for the original debt. Think about the convoluted system they put in. You're paying with the debt notes that the debt is based on. And as long as they keep that system in place and the cash flows are coming in, they don't care about the original principle. All right. So now let's get back to the rest of the system. Because now the banks, just like they created the real estate, they got all these other loans, right? They got car loans, student loans, home loans, refi loans, construction loans, credit lines. And now you look at 7, that's what that is. You got people and businesses, 7 and 8. They're giving the credit and loans to the people and the businesses. Remember all those entities, the 360 entities? They're giving them the loans. And then what did I tell you? Every time money changes hands, they're now going to use that influx of money to now go out and spend it. And as they spend that money from those loans, they're now generating more traffic of swaps of debt. Because every single transaction on that credit line, on that money, is being taxed again. And then now we go into 9, where every single person and business, every single 360 entities from 7 and 8 has to pay their yearly taxes back to the Treasury Department, paying back the original bond that they created. You cannot learn this anywhere else. Now, there are more intricate details, but I try to keep it as simple as possible because I didn't want to confuse you. There is something called a federal fractional reserve system. I'm not going to get into that, but money is exponentially created through the fractional reserve system. These are all little smaller components to keep more money being generated. And then once again, the real backbone of our financial system, and not just ours, the entire central bank, the global financial system, because every economy, every central bank, every financial system across the globe, number one, is connected since 1944. And the backing of every currency is is credit swaps, debt swaps, cash flows coming in, paying your debt, whether it's a bond, whether it's a loan. As long as you have those cash flows coming in, the system doesn't break. And they create value by lowering and increasing interest rates. They keep the system going by allowing inflation. Because here's my speculation, guys. Inflation is not real. Inflation did not exist before 1914. When they came up with those calculations, they found a way to include inflation inside the system. But if they weren't manipulating, if they weren't driving interest rates up and driving interest rates down, I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think they're creating their own inflation. I think the greed of the corporations with their shrinkflation, paying people different amounts, raising and lowering the prices. I think all of this is what creates the inflation. The greed creates the inflation. And I think because they knew that corporations were going to do that, the financial system was going to have the greed built in. Because if you look back before 1914, there were financial crashes where people didn't care. People were scamming people left and right. Who cares about everybody else? I even told you, J.P. Morgan had to bail out the U.S. economy 3 different times because of the greed of the financial institutions. So they made sure to incorporate that into the calculations so that they can control the greed through inflation. All the same time creating a hidden tax for the consumer. Inflation, in my opinion, inflation is not real.
Yep. Some people
Inflation
call
is
it the
something.
invisible tax. Yeah.
There you go. It's the invisible tax that nobody sees until it's too late. It's another form of taxation. But the interesting thing about that tax is it doesn't come back down. We've never seen inflation over the long duration go back down. You guys have heard of, well, I even remember in my 50 years, I used to be able to go to the store and with $1, I can buy a Kit Kat bar and a Lipton iced tea. If I try to do that in today's economy with the inflation increasing over my 40, 50 years, I would spend more like $3 or $4 for the same Kit Kat bar or Twix and a Lipton tea. A loaf of bread used to be 5, 10 cents back in the 1900s. Now that same loaf of bread is $3 plus, and it never goes back down.
Yeah, they get us caught up in the increasing numbers, but it's all about what you can actually get with it as opposed to the
There you
number
go.
of dollars. Yeah.
How much am I getting? And that now ties into the dollar strength. How strong is a currency is based on the buying power. And they are affecting the buying power of the dollar. They're affecting the buying power of every currency around the world. Because isn't that what interest rates do? Interest rates, like the dollar goes up, it makes our dollar stronger and makes other currencies weaker. So they're able to purchase less. It's a very corrupt system, but our job is not to police the corruption. Our job is to mitigate it. Our job is to find a way to get around it, to recognize the corruption, the manipulation, and then find a way to minimize it, to know how the system works. But this is what the money's based on. This is why the dollar is so powerful, because you need the money to buy the materials for the supply chain. You need the money to buy the products once they're at the storefront. Our economy would not exist without the current financial system that we're in. And this is the interesting part about BRICS. BRICS is not trying to get rid of the system. Here's the interesting part about BRICS that nobody talks about. BRICS is not trying to get rid of the whole fiat system. They just want to get rid of the US dollar being the backing of it because they know it's lucrative. So they're not saying, oh, the whole system's broken. No. The only problem that we have, because we're still greedy, we still want to make our money, we just don't like the US being the leader of it. We want to be in charge of our own corruption. So this is the money value chain. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and get off of YouTube now. I want to thank everybody on YouTube that has participated. Roy, why don't you come inside the Zoom? I'm gonna post a message for all of my subscribers. If you're a subscriber, let me say that on the video in case you guys go back and watch it. If you're a subscriber, you can come to the Zoom. I already posted it on WhatsApp at the beginning of the week. If you are an active subscriber, you can come to the Zoom. I posted the login information. So I need you to come into the Zoom. You are welcome. And that's why I got to reach out because I haven't seen Lisa. I haven't seen a lot of other subscribers. So I'm going to do what I can to kind of get you guys back into the room. You don't need the to go to YouTube. All right. So let me go ahead and log off of YouTube. I will see you guys tomorrow around 7:45. All right. Thanks so much, guys.